Rise and shine, everyone, and welcome to another live Q&A. My name is Cédric Marin, and I'm an immigration lawyer at Holt Immigration Law. And today, we're going to speak about how to immigrate to Canada, and we're going to take all your questions and answers. Before we get going, as usual, please let me know from where you're joining from, if it's inside Canada, the city you're at, and also let me know why you're joining us. Is it to learn more about Express Entry? Is it because you're already an applicant and you're just keeping track of immigration law? Please let me know. I'd love to hear more about where you are. We have Mary who says, hello Cédric, smiley face. And then we have Parasuko who says, bonjour, bonjour à vous aussi. Donc, les jeudis, je fais des lives en français et en anglais, but today it's just going to be in English. But on Thursdays at the same time, I do live Q&As. So feel free. We also have Mary asking questions right away. Please continue asking questions. Let's build up a few questions. Let me know from where you're joining from, and we'll take the questions in a few moments. For those of you just joining us, welcome. For those who are returning viewers, again, welcome. I just want to let you know that we actually have a newsletter, and something that came on my last live Q&A was about the Express Entry score. So what I actually did is that I asked each lawyer at our firm, so Mark, Chanel, Alicia, and myself, and I asked everyone to give me their best bet. When would the CRS score drop under 500? So this is actually part of our newsletter. We send these out on Thursdays or Fridays. We're trying to do one every week. Again, we're a small firm. We're only 5-6 individuals. But here we have just an overview of our newsletters. So here we have Mark wrote a blog on the TR to PR, his key takeaways. At the bottom as well, we have the mandatory filing for PR applications, which Alicia wrote. Chanel did a great a great video on study permits. So if you're thinking about a study permit for the next intake, which is in January, take a look at Chanel's video and contact Chanel. She's our resident study permit expert. And here at the bottom, I also had a blog about if you're a doctor. So subscribe to our newsletter to stay up to date. And again, we're just going to go back here. I think this is what a lot of people want to know is when is the next CRS score going to drop under 500? So here are some of the predictions. So Mark says it's an easy slam dunk. After the draw last Wednesday, he thinks that it's going to go back down to under 500. The next draw, which is expected on October 12th. So we're going to see they follow the same pattern in terms of number of people they take. He thinks that by October 14th, we're going to have the CRS score drop under 500. Let's keep looking. So my guess, so I'm a little bit pessimistic, if you will, but I'm saying about 2 months, right? I've said this on the podcast before, but I think a lot of new applicants are learning that Express Entry is reopening. They're finalizing their applications. They're resubmitting it. We're also finding more and more PNPs around this time of the year also being issued. So I'm saying about 2 months. Maybe it's going to be in the 490s for a bit, but I think more and more applicants are going to join. But again, I really hope that IRCC proves me wrong. Chanel says, based on the number of individuals, also predicting that it's going to be the next draw, that it's going to be below 500. And after Alicia says by the end of October, this could be 1 or 2 draws for Alicia. So we are expecting, our best guess is that the CRS score will drop under 500 in October. And I seem to be the only one that says, okay, maybe it's going to be 3 draws from now since so many people are making new applications. But listen, subscribe to our newsletter. It's great content. I'm the one that writes it. So I'm very happy to present it to you guys. Head on over to our website, Canadian Immigration Institute, explore our courses and whatnot. But here we also have the subscribe now to the newsletter. We want to learn a little bit more about you, and then you can enter your full name and email. And then hopefully every week we're going to send you a newsletter. So it's pretty great. This week, I'm asking people, our lawyers this week, I'm asking them, what is the most common mistake that people make in their Express Entry applications? So we do a lot of Express Entry applications, a lot of immigration work. We only do immigration work. And we have people who retain us at the very beginning of their immigration journey, right? To get a study permit, to get a post-graduation work permit, for the permanent residence and whatnot. But we also have people who retain us or contact us after they've been rejected the permanent residence application, sometimes 2 or 3 times before they reach out to a lawyer for help. So we get to see a lot of applications that are successful, but we also see applications that were not successful. So I asked Mark, I asked Alicia, I asked Chanel, and again, we're going to send it on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you're going to have an overview of what our lawyers think are the most common mistakes. So for you who are preparing your applications right now, definitely subscribe and definitely take a look at that. And you know what? I'm going to jump the gun and we're going to go straight to what I think is the most common mistake in express entry applications. And Mark agreed with me and he said, "Oh, you already picked the best one, so I have to pick another one." But listen, take a look here. This is the IRCC page for the completeness check. And here it actually talks about what do they expect applicants to include inside their express entry application. And it's very specific. And if you fall short of these requirements, you are going to have your application rejected, right? They're not going to give you a second chance to get a better reference letter. They're not going to come back to you saying, "Oh, by the way, you didn't put the proper language test and whatnot." So something that Alicia stressed as well, that supporting documents are also one of the most common mistakes. So let's take a look here as what is required. And again, these are the general requirements that are going to talk about within 60 days, making sure that applications, as I mentioned, the applications are assessed upfront, right? If there's a mistake, it's going to be rejected. They're not going to send it back for you to fix. And here they say they want the processing standard is 6 months. We all know that it's much longer than that, about 15 months for Canadian experience class right now, and 26 months for the foreign skilled workers. In any event, let's continue reading. But what you're going to find here is what's going to happen to incomplete applications. But here we have the actual document checklist. So when you make your express entry application and you submit your profile, it's going to ask you for specific documents, and they want this in a very specific way, right? So for translations, keep in mind, you have to scan the original as well. You can't just give the translation. They want to see the original with the translation, French or English, and it has to be stamped by a certified translator or accompanied by an affidavit, right? So very specific for translations. But let's keep going down here to talk about medical exams, requirements for police certificates. Again, very specific. And I think, and I've seen a lot of these, is it fails for lack of proof of work experience. And here it's like, what do you provide for the work experience? Well, you have to provide a reference letter, and this is what it should contain, right? Here are the requirements. Here's what it needs to contain. Very specific: job title, duties and responsibilities, job status, dates worked for the companies, number of hours worked, annual salary plus benefits. If you can, they also want you to provide tax documents, slips and assessments. You can even provide pay stubs that shows how many hours you worked, right? And again, you have to demonstrate that you meet your NOC, right? The lead statement and the main duties for your NOC, you need to meet it. So this reference letter, this information should have it right in there. So this is what I think is the most common mistake. I've seen applications fail because it doesn't mention previous positions or pay. It doesn't mention if it was full-time or part-time, right? And so they're not able to assess, IRCC is not able to assess whether or not you meet the NOC requirements. So take a look at this to make sure that your reference letters, your copies of pay stubs, your documents are really well prepared. If you work part-time, start looking at whether or not you meet the eligibility and whether it counts as a full year, right? Different requirements depending on the different stream. But if you take Canadian experience class, right, there's a certain calculation for the hours. Make sure that if you're working part-time, working for a placement agency and whatnot, that you're actually properly counting the hours, right? If you work some hours part-time to get that equal amount of part-time work into 1 year of full-time. So work experience is definitely something that a lot of applications will fail on. Make sure that you have the proper letters of reference, proper tax documents, the pay stubs, right? You can have more than one letter of reference if you want. Make sure you properly calculate the hours. And lastly, make sure that the experience that you're claiming is actually eligible for points, right? It'd be very sad for you to wait, a year and a half just to learn that the experience you claimed did not qualify for the Canadian experience class, right? And so what I mean by this is if you take a look, and we're gonna go to Canadian work experience, and we're gonna head down. So Canadian work experience. So here we go. Here are the points that are assigned. There's also transferability points that you can get, like additional bonus points, if you will. But let's keep going down here, and let's take a look here at the requirements. So here are some of the requirements that you need to meet, but more specifically, make sure that you're properly counting the full-time hours. You can only claim 30 hours per week, right? Work in excess is not going to count. And make sure that you meet the actual work experience, right? So work that you obtained that was self-employed or unauthorized will not be calculated for the Canadian work experience, right? There's an exception for doctors, and if you're a doctor, take a look at our website. We just have a new blog. There's only an exception for doctors, but right now, if you're self-employed or unauthorized work, it's not going to be counting as Canadian work experience. Same thing, right? If you worked during your studies, you can't count this as points. So work experience is going to make or break your express entry application. And obviously we have experience in doing this for clients. And so if you're interested in speaking with a lawyer, you can head over to our website, Health Immigration Law. At the very top, you can go over speak with a lawyer, and you can scroll down. We have our colleague Alicia, we have Chanel, and then we have me at the bottom. Keep in mind that I'm currently teleworking from abroad on the UCT+3, which means that if you're in Canada and you want to speak with a lawyer early in the morning, get the best out of yourself, I'm available in the morning if you're inside Canada. And if you're outside Canada, I'm most likely available during the day or evening for you. So lots of availability to help clients achieve their immigration needs. And here you can see some of the things that I work on, Express Entry obviously being the core of what we do, and also specializing in litigation, reconsiderations, delayed applications. All of this are work areas of focus. So there we have it. But again, subscribe to a newsletter. We have some good content. If you go into the CanadianImmigrationInstitute.com, scroll down, hit subscribe now. We also have classes that are coming up. So there's a link in the description. The next one is the spousal sponsorship course and masterclass. And then we also have an express entry course. So this includes, take a look here at what it includes very briefly. Take a look here at the bottom. We have here our different modules, the amount of videos and whatnot. So there we have it. Let's head straight to your questions. And again, subscribe to our newsletter. We're going to have more information about the most common mistakes for express entry applications. All right. We have Sophie joining us from Kenya. And again, I don't take the questions in order. I try to take questions that are most helpful for everyone. I don't want to say, every question, speak to a lawyer, sorry, this is too complex, speak to a lawyer. So I try to take the questions that are most helpful to everyone here. So let's get going. Let's start looking at some questions. So Mary, very first question says, please, sir, as I view my submitted documents, I saw optional information side there. There was written 231022, this date is required, but I don't know whether they're asking for more information or not. So I don't know what you're applying for, if it's work permit, if you're applying, Mary, for something else, like express, like a permanent resident application or whatnot. But there is, it's had happen with clients of mine where they're inside Canada and they don't need a visa, but yet after they submit their application, they view it, it's going to say that the application for a visa outside Canada is required. And every time they log in, every day they log in, the date actually gets pushed back by one. But they never received a letter. They never received an email. It's very odd. It seems like it's a technical glitch. But at this time, and again, just general information that if it says it's required, doing a web form and including the application, explaining, saying, listen, every day I log in, it tells me that it's required. I don't think this form is required. In any event, here's the duly completed form. Again, it's optional. I don't think it applies to me. And again, if you want to speak with me more in detail about how to do this or what is needed, I'd love to help you. But there are glitches in the program, but generally speaking, I would recommend that you follow the instructions that are on the online portal. All right, Mary says, if an employer's name who has signed the work experience letter is misspelled in translation, would that be an issue? Question mark. Not the company, but the person in charge. Thank you. Listen, Mary, I think my advice to you is let's try to avoid reasons why immigration officers would reject your application, right? Translation of a document would, I don't know how much it costs, anywhere from, I'd say, $50 to $200 to get this translated, get this properly done. But it avoids the risk of having to wait 10, 15, 20 months, right, for federal skilled worker to have your application rejected because of an error in the translation. Translation errors can be reasons for an application to get rejected. And so my advice, if you're still at the ITA stage and you still have time, to definitely get this translated and get it done properly. The person who translated should obviously have done their work properly from the very beginning. But I would definitely try to avoid this issue. If you're at the final days of the IT and you can't get it translated and your points are not going to change, right? So in this case, you're not going to, your LMIA is still going to be valid, your language scores are still going to be valid and whatnot. You can also consider declining the invitation, getting your proper documents properly sorted out from the beginning, and then waiting for the next invitation to apply. So it's really up to you how you want to do it. I would want to avoid this, right? Avoid any reason why someone could reject your application and get it properly completed. If you realize this after you applied, you can definitely make a web form and include the documents, the properly translated documents. But again, it's we want this done to be completed properly from the very beginning. Sahith says, "Hi Marin, I am Sahith from inside Canada. Currently, I am on postgrad work permit, and as it is an open work permit, I am working 3 full-time jobs. Will it create an issue for my express entry PR?" So great question. And let's head, so it's not going to create any, so to answer your question, it's not going to create an issue as long as you're respecting the conditions on your post-graduation work permit. So for example, you might have a condition that you can't work in healthcare, right? If you haven't done a medical assessment, you can't work in healthcare. There's other restrictions as well. So just take a look at your work permit at the very bottom. There might be other restrictions, or there might not be restrictions, right? Depending on your situation. But generally speaking, with the open work permit, you can work. If you're working 3 full-time jobs, you must be working extremely hard right now. But as long as you're meeting the conditions of your open work permit, of your post-graduation work permit, which is an open work permit, so it's not employer specific, it's not location specific, and generally there aren't really harsh requirements other than the healthcare that I talked about. It's not going to be a problem. But keep in mind, we talked about this on the eligibility, right? That as it relates to your Canadian work experience, and we can head over there right now. And they're only going to count 30 hours, right? So we don't count any hours that go above 30 hours a week. So you can't claim 100 hours a week for the next 15 weeks and then claim a year of full-time work experience. There's a cap of 30 hours per week. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your application and you're working three full-time jobs. And it's very impressive. Again, when you create your application, you have to declare the experience for which you're claiming points for, and then so you can only claim 1 job if you want at a NOC, OA or B, and then you're gonna have to declare all the other work experience in your personal information when it comes to actually submitting your application. But when you create your profile, you're only going to declare the points, the work experience that you want points. And usually, when someone are working 3, 4, 5, when they're working numerous jobs, it's usually low skilled, right? So another caveat, another thing you need to keep in mind the Canadian work experience is that it has to be in a NOC O, A, or B, right? So a skilled work experience. So make sure that the occupations that you're working in right now are going to meet the requirements for the Canadian work experience for express entry application. In particular, again, repeating myself, the 30 hours a week, and make sure that your job meets the NOC O, A, or B, right? So if you have a full-time job, let's say as an accountant, and you have another full-time job, let's say in retail, and you have another full-time job, working for a food delivery company as well, that's fine. But the only job that's going to count for the Canadian work experience is going to be the NOC OA or B job. In this case, your accounting experience. The other experience, again, you have to declare it, but not when you create your profile. So there we have it. All right, another question. Kabir Patel says, "Oh no, I ran out of water." Again, I don't know how Mark or Alicia does this, how they speak for an hour without any water. All right, let's continue. Kabir says, "Hello, I graduated from a college in 2019. Will graduate from university in 2023. Can I apply to the international graduate program if it opens up this year or next?" Let's take a look here. International graduate program. So keep in mind that there are PNPs that are going to be based on, so provincial nominees that are going to be based on your education, right? So in your case, Kabir, there might be a PNP, for example, in Ontario for master level or bachelor level students that can apply. Sorry, for Ontario, it's only master and PhD, but depending on your province, you might have a PNP, a provincial nominee that is going to be available. I think this is what you're referring to in terms of it being reopened for the international graduate program. What you're going to be doing though is most likely getting a postgraduate work permit, right? That's going to be valid for 3 years. Again, it has all their own requirements and whatnot, but it's important that you maintain full-time status in school. So you maintain full-time status, and then you, and there's a few other requirements, but you get your postgraduate work permit to work for 3 years, get Canadian work experience, and then apply for express entry. But take a look at PNPs because you've already graduated from a university and you're going to graduate from another one. Again, here is, I'm assuming that you're inside Canada. It doesn't say, but let's say that you're inside Canada, you could apply for the postgraduate work permit. All right, and then it says, my question is in two parts. Due to less space, what if you work in family business, got paid in cash, and don't have salary slips to prove it? Hence, is it legal to make a new one and get it signed by the employer, or any documents which we make on our own to prove cash salary? Sorry, let me just reread this again. Is it legal to make a new one? I don't know if you're talking about making a new business to get the documents. I'm not too sure what you mean by your question, and I'm sorry, but listen, I'll try to answer it with the best understanding. So if you take a look at the completeness check, and we talked about this earlier, but yeah, for proof of work experience, you will need to get demonstrate. So you don't necessarily need pay slips, but you're definitely going to have to show that it was paid and the amount of hours you worked. And for family businesses, or for the federal skilled workers, people who were employed, self-employed, or employed in businesses and whatnot, this is most likely going to be the biggest challenge they face in actually showing how many hours they work, right? You can imagine, for example, you have a family business and your job is to take care of the accounting of various businesses and properties, and your parents were just giving you money for the time. It's going to be much more difficult to prove this, right? So if you can't get these letters, what other documents do you have? Do you have, for example, does it go inside a bank account, the cash? Does it not go inside a bank account? Can you reasonably explain why you're missing these documents? Generally speaking, you're taking a risk, right? If you don't meet the completeness check, you're taking a risk that your application is found to be incomplete. So in these cases, we usually recommend, for example, you get other work experience or Canadian work experience, and we're going to focus on that and not necessarily claim your family business or your self-employment for points. It is challenging, and I wouldn't. I would take this very seriously. I would take these requirements very seriously, because you don't want to wait 12, 15, 20 months just to get rejected application. All right, Mary has a question. So Mary has applied. So in this case, Mary is asking about express entry. And so when you get your invitation to apply, you have 60 days to complete your application and submit it. And there's going to be a section in personal history that's going to ask you, hey, what have you been doing since the age of 18 or the last 10 years? And again, you want this to be as detailed as possible. So here, if you do have any volunteering activity, it should definitely be declared. It would be, if it's not paid, you could put unemployed for sure. And what I recommend you do is, in your letter of explanation, you actually explain what it was, right? So you could say, for example, I worked for 3 months. I volunteered for 3 months in my country, for the Red Cross, and here's the I put unemployed because I wasn't paid. It wasn't employment, but it was volunteer work. And Mary, one thing to be careful, right, is that if you did this in Canada, if we did this in Canada, we just need to make sure that it wasn't considered work. So in Canada, even if it was unpaid, right, what is considered work has a specific definition for immigration purposes, and essentially it's competing with Canadians. So when you're competing on the Canadian job market, it can be considered to be work. And I'm just trying to pull up the page. I know Alicia and Mark did a video about this. So there we go. So here we are on the definition of work. And so work is defined as an activity which wages are paid or commission is earned, or that competes directly with activities of Canadian citizens or PRs in the Canadian labor market, right? So even if it was unpaid, if you're volunteering for example, a company, which the position would usually be paid, it can still be considered as work. And this is important because if you volunteered for, let's say, a company as you were a student and you exceeded the amount of hours, right, or you didn't respect the conditions on your study permit or work permit or whatnot, it can be considered as unauthorized work, right? So take a look at this as what competes directly and whatnot. And again, this only applies really if it was inside Canada or inside another country where there was, visa or work permit requirements, right? But definitely take a look at this to make sure that if you volunteered in Canada and you did not have a work permit or didn't respect the conditions of your work permit to make sure that it's properly disclosed. You still have to disclose it, right? Even if you had unauthorized work, you have to disclose it. You can't just ignore it, but do make sure that you provide an explanation if this is the case, right? You volunteered in Canada, but it's really considered work, and you can be found to have worked without authorization. All right, let's keep going. We have a lot of questions here. I'm doing my best to go through them, give a complete answer, not dwell on any, and provide the best legal information. The new NOC system being implemented, how do you think it's going to affect EE draws and schedule? You know what? That's an excellent question. I think the changes that we anticipate have less to do with the NOC system and more to do with what's just coming to Express Entry. And what we're going to see is the minister having the ability to target foreign workers, target immigrants for specific locations and for specific NOCs. So right now, I think one of the challenges they have is that they're taking individuals with the best score, which is fantastic, but they're not necessarily taking the individuals. And again, this is just for Express Entry. They're not taking the individuals with the highest labor need, right? So for example, there's a shortage of doctors inside Canada right now, as a lot of people know, and some emergency rooms are closing, right? Or they're having temporary hours and whatnot. So it's really impacting Canadians. And so this ability for Express Entry is going to allow the minister to go in to the pool and seriously just take the doctors and give them an invitation to apply. And this is what we're anticipating. It hasn't been announced yet. We're still waiting to see how it's going to be implemented. But I think a lot of changes are going to allow the minister to send invitations to apply, to better accommodate individuals, to better accommodate the Canadian labor market. The NOC changes are going to have to do, so some jobs that are currently considered NOC C are now going to be considered NOC B. Those are going to be some important changes, and it's going to be called TEER, T-E-E-R. And I actually wrote a blog on it about some of the important changes. So if you head on over to our website, to Hall of Immigration Law, click on Resources and Blog, and actually have this search bar now. So let's go take a look. So TEER. And there we go. So this is the blog that I wrote. And here we're talking about new eligibility for Express Entry. So here we can see that the skill B is going to be now Tier 2 and Tier 3. So it's going to be divided, and we're going to see some small changes here, right? So here's a list of occupations that are now going to become illegible. There we go. So here we have nurse aides, patient associates, so personal support workers, right, are now going to qualify for Express Entry. This is what we're expecting to happen. It hasn't been announced. This is based on information that we've seen from IRCC. Another important one, we have bus drivers, subway operators, other transit operators, so also known as truck drivers and so on, transport truck drivers. So these people are also going to qualify for Express Entry. So there's going to be some changes to do with the NOC changing in November. But I think a lot of the changes we're going to see to Express Entry are going to be based on the Canadian labor market and targeting occupations based on that. There was announced, it's been 2 weeks now, but the TR to PR strategy was announced. And we have Mark here who wrote a blog on the top 6 key takeaways from the minister's report to expand the strategy to expand transition to permanent residency. So a lot of people were saying, okay, we're going to see another TR to PR like we saw before, right? Where we saw this, this big rush of individuals applying for PR, or what are we going to see? And what we saw was, an improvement, tweaking to existing programs. So if you're interested by this, take a look at the strategy. It's detailed, it's long, but and here's an overview. So some interesting things you're going to see, for example, they might be exploring a municipal nominee program, right? They're going to continue to build on the rural and northern immigration, right? But take a look at this. This is going to explain essentially a lot of the changes that we expect to happen in immigration. That's going to be in immigration programs and tons of programs over the next 6 months to a year. I think this is really important. And after read Mark's blog here about what his view is. So there we have it. All right. Let's take a question. Sorry, just a little bit lost here. There we go. So Parasuko, sorry, just great question. Again, this is less to do with current applications, but I think a lot of changes are going to come in the next 6 to 12 months. And sorry, and just to conclude, one thing that was interesting too is, when we think about immigration, we also need to think that Canada has an incentive to get individuals in the labor market, right, for economic reasons to expand Canada's economic ability. But in a way, Canada is also competing for immigrants with other countries, those in Europe and in the United States, right? So we have an incentive both from the economic, from businesses who need workers, but there's also an incentive from trying to increase economic growth and, if you will, competing for immigrants. So they're aware of the long processing times. They're aware that they need to change what is happening, and it's going to be very exciting in the next 6 months. But listen, great question. All right, Rachel says, "Hi Cédric, is it possible to extend a confirmation of permanent residence?" Honestly, no. It's very strict. It's very tough. You can try submitting a web form. You can try calling them to do it, but in my experience, the date on there is very strict. It's usually linked to the expiry of your medical, and that's why they're very strict. It's because then they have to, if they extend it, they need to reconfirm your eligibility. You have to redo your medicals and whatnot. So the confirmation of permanent residence is usually linked to your medical examination, and it cannot be extended. So make sure you come to Canada and with the intention to settle as a PR before it expires. Aisha says, "Hi Cédric, I've been listening to Mark and Alicia, so it's really nice to hear your Q&A." Well, fantastic, Aisha. Thank you for joining us. Really happy to have you again. We're doing this in the morning because I'm teleworking. So if you're available, if you want to speak to a lawyer in the morning, more than happy to speak with you. Marielle says, "Sir, any update on the new policy for PR?" Marielle, I encourage you to look at the top 6 key takeaways from the minister. Mark wrote a great blog on this. There's also lots of content on our channel as well. Mark did tons of videos. No updates right now. We're still waiting for some implementations from their strategy report. We're going to see what's going to be happening. We're going to take a look and we're going to follow closely. I mean, we want to be the first ones to let you know in our newsletters, in our videos, in our live Q&As. We want to be the first to let you know. All right. 86 Mariam says, "The company from which I got my work experience letter has a website which no longer works. Should I say anything in the letter of explanation? Website address is on the letterhead of the reference letter." Mary, excellent question. I would definitely encourage you to be proactive and explain any deficiencies in letters of reference from the very beginning, right? If they have a new website and whatnot, definitely link it. If you can get an explanation from someone that works there, just a short email saying, "Hey, I noticed that your website doesn't work anymore. Can you please provide me with a new one or explain what happened?" This would help, essentially show to the immigration officers that that this is really just a website changing, right? Because there is fraud in immigration, and they do check. Immigration officers and some around the world, they have anti-fraud units, and in the anti-fraud units, they will physically go to the location of the office. And they're going to check. They're going to knock on the door. They're going to look at, is the office here? Is the office operating? They might even ask for managers and supervisors and whatnot. So they do check, and they do verify this. And so if you can proactively let them know, "Hey, listen, the website changed. I sent them an email. Here's their reply. I don't know why they don't have a website, but I just wanted to be honest with you and share this with you." It's definitely going to go a long way to prevent any issues in terms of the defects in the reference letter, but might also provide and help them in any fraud concerns that they may have. And Mary has another question. So again, Mary, I think you're completing an EAPR here, an electronic application for permanent residence, because you have all these great questions. Here's another one. "If my job is done from home remotely in another city, should I mention my city as its location or the company is located?" Oh yeah, there we go. In EAPR personal history, right? So when you complete your work experience, you're going to have to declare, they're going to want an address as to where their work took place. And this is a challenge that people have faced with COVID of teleworking, right? So again, I think the best way to deal with this, and I was dealing with this just yesterday, would be to provide this in the letter of explanation, saying, "Listen, in the address history, in the address where the work was completed, I indicated the address of my employer because that's where the work should be completed. However, because of COVID, I've been working from home remotely. Here's my home address," right? So providing this explanation, I think, goes a long way in terms of where their work was completed. Because, you know, if you work as part of a team, is it completed at the office, but you're contributing from home? There's some uncertainty. So I would definitely try to explain those, those two different addresses in a letter of explanation to address any concerns. If it's outside Quebec and it's in if it's outside Quebec, it's going to be it's right. So you want the work to be outside Quebec for express entry, essentially. Sorry, you don't want the work to be outside Quebec, but you have to have an intention to reside outside Quebec, right? So if you're working for a Quebec company but teleworking in Ontario, then you can get into some weird issues, but that's not your case. So let's move on. All right, Ayesha says, please do Q&A on visit visa. Ayesha, here, we do a 30-second rundown on a visitor visa, right? So under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act and the regulations, at the end of your stay, you have to demonstrate that you're going to leave Canada. And this is where a lot of individuals fail for their visitor visa application. You need to demonstrate that you're going to come back to your country, right? So question is, how do you do that? And a few ways. So for example, if you have, for example, a family, your kids, your spouse might stay inside of the country and you might be the only one to travel to come back to your country, right? That's going to be one tie. If you have, for example, a job and you're taking 2-week leave, you could even provide a letter from your employer confirming that you are taking 2 weeks leave, it has been approved, and that your employer expects you to return, right? We also have property, right? If you have property, well, you have to take care of it. You have to come back to your country to take care of it, right? So when we work with our clients for visitor visas, we're looking at the first thing we want to talk about is the ties in the home country. Job, family, kids are going to be strong ties. We can also look at previous immigration history, right? Have you traveled throughout Europe for the last 5 years and the United States had always complied with all the visa requirements? It's going to be much easier to obtain a visitor visa. You also, there's obviously more requirements to that, but this is definitely one of the most important reasons and the first thing that you should address for a visitor visa, right? We're also going to be looking at, IRCC is going to be looking at the ties that you have inside of Canada, right? So you're, for example, a spouse, and you're coming to visit your partner and you don't have a job, it's obviously going to be much more difficult to get the visitor visa to demonstrate that you're going to go back to your country. Obviously, your country of nationality plays a big role, right? Countries that are more volatile with inflation or economic crises might have a harder time of getting a visitor visa because we're talking about the ties to the country, right? There's going to be more of an incentive to not come back to the country. So these are all factors that play a role. We're more than happy to help you out if you want help to prepare your visitor visa application. You head over to our website, Whole of Immigration Law, and there's also a link in the description. And go ahead here with Speak with a Lawyer, and at the bottom here you can find me to book a consult to speak more about how we can help you for your application. So there we have it. Let's go on. I don't think we can do a full Q&A just on visitor visas, but we can definitely hope that was helpful. All right, let's head back here to our main screen. All right, so Parasuko says, what if the reference letters is not complete? Will they accept other proof like emails, job description, documents? Right, so Mark has a whole video on our channel, I think it was posted about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and talks about what to do if your reference letter is incomplete. But we can go take a look here at the completeness check, and the short answer is that they're not going to accept like self-serving statements like an affidavit or something that's self-declared. And this is indicated, where is it indicated? Yeah, so this is under the self-employment section, but you can see here, self-declared main duties or affidavits are not accepted as proof of self-employed work experience. It doesn't say anything about employee-employer relationship, but generally speaking, this also applies. So you can do other things, right? You can get your contract. So your contract might actually have the main duties in there, right? More information on the duties. Some companies will not give reference letters, but they might give a certificate, right? That says that this person is employed full-time, earning X amount of money. You might also have pay stubs, right? The pay stub is going to show how much money you made. The pay stub might also have your position, show how many hours you worked. You might also have tax documents. If you stop working for them in Canada, you're going to get a record of employment. This shows that you worked for the company, and it's going to have your title and job and then in the record of employment, right? These are different ways that you can help with the letters of reference. You can also explain it, but you shouldn't just have your own explanation to do that. Lastly, you should also have an explanation as to why you can't get a proper reference letter, right? Like what efforts have you done to get this letter of reference? Like did you write to HR? Did you try calling them? Was there against company policy? Is there like, why are they not giving you this? And the key part, what efforts have you done to try to obtain it? So I think it's gonna go a very long way. Again, Mark did a whole video. I think it's 5, 10, 15 minutes just on this topic, but generally speaking, do your best effort to obtain documents, right? Focus on pay stubs, tax documents, contracts, and whatnot, and explain why you can't get this reference letter, right? It happens, but do your best. And generally speaking, don't just say, I worked as an engineer, right? And have no reference letter without explaining why you don't have any of the documents or what efforts you made to obtain them. All right, Mary, so many questions here. Again, I feel like there's a lot of people completing their electronic applications for permanent residence, and congratulations to you all, guys. Again, we're just giving you legal information just to help you with understanding the express entry. If you want us to actually review your documents, review your application, obviously we can help you with that. So interesting question. So can I use employer's name, a person for one job, and company name for another, or should it be consistent? So it's an interesting question, and I think you're going to want to make sure that what was your relationship, right, with this individual. So for example, you can think, for example, if Cédric Marin as an individual is, for example, buying a cup of coffee, well, I'm the one contracting with a business to buy a cup of coffee, right? But I also have a sole proprietorship, and people might have different companies, right? So your relationship, the contract, was it with the individual, or was it with the company, or was it through another entity, like, for example, a recruitment agency or a placement agency, right? So you're going to want to make sure that this is set out, in part because we need to explain whether or not you're considered to be self-employed and whatnot. But also you want this set out so you can properly answer this question, right? So if your relationship was with the corporation, right, it could be Cédric Marin Corporation, or it could just be with Cédric Marin as an individual. Your reference letter, your contract, your pay stubs is going to have more information. Again, any concerns about these small issues, best to declare it up front and include a letter of explanation. All right, Ali, let's get to your question. Is salary slip mandatory when your bank statement shows amount with narration? So what we're talking about is just the proof of work experience. And this is just, again, how can we help the visa officer make a positive decision, right? Well, one of the ways is to provide more documents than just the reference letter, is to go ahead and provide those pay stubs, tax documents, contracts, to go above and beyond to really show that, yes, I meet this knot, and yes, I work there. All right, but I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure if your question is asking, if you're still with us, feel free to help me out here, but I don't know if you're asking about proof of work experience, proof of funds. So proof of funds is different. It only applies to federal skilled workers. So Canadian experience class is exempt from proof of funds. So federal skilled workers, right? You have the minimum income cutoff called LICO. Get to that right now. There we go. Oops. LICO, we're just going to go express entry. So proof of funds, right? So this depends on how many individuals you have. And I might be repeating myself, but in previous videos I talked about, for example, if you submit your application as one person, well, you got to prove 13,300. And then even after you submit your application, you get married, well, now your eligibility, right, changes. You need to meet the proof of funds of 16,500. So if you're adding a spouse or a child to your application, keep in mind that it's actually going to increase. The proof of funds here is actually going to increase. And the first thing they're going to ask when you send the web form to be like, hey, I just got married, here's my birth certificate, or here's a new birth. The first thing they're going to ask is, all right, proof of funds, right? So a way to avoid delays is you can actually provide your proof of funds up front when you're going to be adding someone, right? Is to provide this proof of funds to avoid further delays in the processing, right? We've made previous videos about change in circumstances, but after you submit your EAPR, but just keep in mind that if this is required, this is going to be increasing, right? All right, again, Ali, I don't know if your question is about proof of funds or if it's about work experience. Here for proof of funds, it says current balance of each account as well as the average balance for the past 6 months. So usually people are going to print out, like monthly pay stubs, monthly like summaries of all their bank statements. they're going to put this in the last 6 months. There might also have a letter from the bank saying assets and liabilities, right? So investments and stocks, debts like, buying a car, buying a house, to show essentially how much money they have, to show that they actually meet the low income cutoff. So I don't know what your question is. If you have 1 year bank statements that shows the amount with narration, that's fantastic. Obviously, the more the better, but really the necessary and what they want to see is obviously the past 6 months and that you meet this requirement here. And this is total assets, right? So if you have 30,000 in cash, but you have 40,000 debt because you bought a new Mercedes-Benz, well, guess what? You're most likely going to be under the funds requirement, right? But again, it's on a case-by-case basis, but generally speaking, you want to be over the proof of funds and demonstrate how you can settle inside Canada with the amount of income that you have. All right. Will accountants with 450 score have any chance at PNPs? Oh, geez. So each province, right? We have 10 provinces. Each have their own PNP programs. In Ontario, I think there's like a dozen PNP programs. BC probably has about 5 or 6. Alberta, a handful. So, I mean, your question is asking about 40 to 50, maybe 60 different programs for PNPs, right? So, and it also depends on your specific NOC for accountant. There's different NOCs depending on what you're doing as accountants. You're doing audits. Are you doing management as an accountant? It really depends on your NOC. It depends on the province. It depends on your Canadian work experience. So obviously, just based on this question, I can't answer the question, but encourage you to reach out if you want to learn more about PNPs. All right, Devin, what can I do if my ex-wife don't want to sign the IMM 5604, even though my children are in my custody? She's out of the country, and have a child with another guy. All right, this sounds kind of a tricky situation here. I encourage you to reach out to me to answer this question. There is so here you're talking about dependents, and this is the medical form. There's also security requirements, right? If your dependents are not medically examined, if not examined by IRCC, they can be found to be ineligible for future sponsorship or future PR applications and whatnot. You are able to provide an explanation and demonstrate you've made the best efforts possible to get this completed by your ex-wife. But this is just a really tricky situation, and it can be unfortunate in some cases where you find yourself in a situation where they reject your PR, or they reject having them accompanying because they have not been examined by IRCC. And let's just go try to find the page to get you going. But again, kind of a tricky situation. Let's try to find it here. So there we go. So here we're under this page. So under this page here, assessment of applicants for overseas dependents. And if we scroll down here and we take a look at criminal and security check requirements, which is going to be one of the components. So if they're not cooperating for the medical examination, they might not be cooperating as well for to sign this form here. So except in few limited cases, an inadmissible family member, whether accompanying or not, renders the principal applicant inadmissible. They're required to undergo background check and security check to approving the applicants, right? So here it talks about if they're not able to obtain these documents, the applicants will be refused by RCC if the common law partner is inadmissible for security criminality. Overseas migration should inform the responsible office. In your case, you're talking about the IMM 5604 medical examination. I'm trying to find the exact statement on this, but generally speaking, if you don't provide it, they can be found, right? They can't be accompanying you for your PR application. You are able in some cases to explain like you've made the best efforts to show that you included it. But really, really just a tricky situation, Devin. You're still married as of now, so yeah, I mean, it's very unfortunate, tricky situation, Devin. Again, get your best efforts to get them to complete the forms, and if you're not able to provide supporting documents that you tried your best, you tried to get them to complete it, but they don't agree to do it. In some cases, it's not going to work out. Again, quite tricky. All right. Sri Krishna Sundar says, I mistakenly selected yes for offer employment, assuming it implies the full-time non-LMIA. and I receive the ITA. Can I select no and explain in the letter of explanation? Yeah, so the offer of employment, if we take a look here at the ministerial instructions, it's going to be for LMIA jobs, right? So a labor market impact assessment, and you're going to get 50 additional points, right? So my question for you, again, we can look here, qualified offer of employment, or offer of arranged. Right, so here it talks about the different points. So here a valid assessment, right? This is the LMIA. There's a few other scenarios, but generally speaking, you need a positive labor market impact assessment. So you got the ITA with a score. So you got an extra 50 points, right? Boom, or even possibly 200 points, right? But let's say you got 50 additional points, right? And your CRS score was 5, the cutoff was 504, right? So if you say no, you're most likely going to drop underneath the minimum cutoff for express entry, right? In other words, let's say your score was 510, you get the invitation with the 504 minimum cutoff, fantastic, get your ITA, but whoa, you actually claim points for something you do not have, right? They're going to reassess your application and your score is going to drop down by 50 points. So you're going to be at 460. So you're going to be under the minimum cutoff for your draw, right? So this means that they're going to reassess your application and reject your application if you're under the minimum cutoff. That being said, if you have a PNP, right, and you answered yes to the question, well, in this case, your PNP gives you 600 points. Whether you're at 1,200 points or 11,000 or 1,150 points, it doesn't matter, right? You're going to be over the cutoff of 504. So my question for you is, do you still meet the minimum cutoff score for express entry? If you don't, I would not even bother submitting the application. You're going to wait 12 months. You're going to wait 15 months just to get rejected on this. If you're above the minimum cutoff, and it's probably going to be because you have a PNP or you have a really, really strong application, in that case, you can go ahead and say no and explain it. They're going to reevaluate your profile. They're going to drop your score down. But as long as you're over the minimum cutoff, you shouldn't have above the minimum cutoff, and you explain it clearly what happened, you shouldn't have an issue. So this question is really going to depend on whether or not you're going to be above the minimum cutoff for the draw. If you're not, yeah, like I said, decline it. You don't want to wait a long time just to get it rejected. All right, Chintan says, how to show travel history within EU Schengen area. Every country we visited or just those with entry and exit stamps? So Shintan, reading the question carefully, the question asks about every country, right? It doesn't ask about entry and exit stamps. And in some cases, for example, you might have visited France for a day, went to Germany, and then went back to France, then back to Switzerland, and then you went to Italy for a week, and then back to France. It has to be disclosed. Just like that, right? It doesn't matter if they stamp your passport. It doesn't matter if they've done that. It's every country you visited. So make sure that you read the question carefully and answer it. And keep in mind, you might forget, right? Like I went in 2018, I went biking across Europe. I biked across Europe, and I did 5 or 6 different countries. And if I looked at my photos, I could probably look for timestamps and get a really good estimate of when I was there. But you might actually just forget the countries, right? So in your letter of explanation, you can say, listen, I did, a 3-week visit in Europe. I answered these questions to my best of my abilities, right? Based on, what I know, my travel tickets, my timestamps. But, please keep in mind that, I went to Croatia for a week and I forget if it was before or after Italy, right? So just explain it. But yeah, it's going to be every country. It's not just going to be stamps. Read the question carefully for more information. And that says, yeah. So, and that I didn't understand your question. But yeah, so let's answer this one. What's the best supporting documents to prove cash salary received from father, family business if I don't have a bank account? Yeah, if you're paid cash, no bank account, do you have a contract that shows your salary? Do you have, a contract that shows your salary? You can try explaining it, right? Saying, listen, we're a family business. It was paid. Here's a letter from my father. Here's an affidavit from my father confirming it was paid. You could try to have an estimate of how many hours you worked, how much money you made. But really, I think just an affidavit from your father, an explanation from yourself as to why you can't provide any documents to prove it was paid. But in that case, we're still dealing with some risk, right? You're still dealing with the risk that it's going to be found to be, self-declared affidavit, or it's going to be a self-serving. So you're still dealing with risk. So my question for you would be, do you have to claim this work experience? Do you have other work experience that you can claim for points to avoid the risk with the family business? Again, it's not impossible, but if you're able to not claim these points and focus on stronger work experience, that would be my question for you. So yeah, statement from your an affidavit or statement from your father, any other proof you can think of, documents, contracts. Your father might have, like, I don't know if they kept track of it, but this would be the best explanation. And after an explanation from yourself, explaining the deficiencies and whatnot. And keep in mind that if you're dealing with this issue of cash salary, you might also be dealing with the issue of the NOC statements, or if you're actually employed as an employee as opposed to a contractor and whatnot. So tons of questions to do with this family business, and it's a little bit difficult to provide general information for that, but I would just do your best and demonstrate that you've tried your hardest and understand that there is some risk obviously associated with that option. Shintan says, for express entry through federal skilled workers, can we show experience gained through NOC-C as secondary experience to increase the NOC score, already experience as NOC-A as primary occupation? Let's go take a look at the ministerial instructions for foreign work experience, and again, it's only going to be NOC O, A, or B. So the foreign work, so you can't claim foreign work experience. You can't claim a NOC C to increase your score, right? It's just not a thing. This being said, keep track to see in November if your NOC changes from a C to a B, then obviously you can claim it, right? But if we take a look here, the ministerial instructions, you can continue scrolling down. Here we talk is acquired by a foreign national outside Canada in one or more occupations listed in skill level O or AB, right, of the NOC. So no, you can't add a NOC C to just boost your CRS score. They're only going to count OAB, and then more requirements, right? There's a calculation for full time, right? The last 10 years and paid by wages or commission, right? So to go back to the last question, this is a requirement. You need to show it, right? If you can't show it through affidavit, through contracts, try to explain why you can't prove it. But generally speaking, you're taking some risk with claiming the family business for your express entry application. Shivam says, "Hello, Cédric. Hope you're doing well. My question is about recent announcement of immigration programs. I want to know if we're expecting any TR to PR." Shivam, it's a question that we're getting a lot. There's no announcement regarding what we saw last year. It was exceptional what happened last year with the TR to PR. Like, it was exceptional, right? I don't think we're going to see another program like we saw last year, unless there's another pandemic or another very intense situation, right? So, I could be wrong. This is just my understanding based on what's available today, right? As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, there is the strategy that was announced by the ministers. If you head over to our website, click on blogs, you can see here there's a blog by Mark called My Top 6 Key Takeaways. And then here, the first link brings us to the strategy, right? This is the strategy that they announced. This is the TR to PR that they announced. And again, it's not a hard TR to PR like before. Rather, it's just improvement of existing programs to facilitate the temporary residence to PR. There's a lot of good stuff in this, but again, we're not going to see a program where it's like, apply in the next 24 hours to get your PR right away. Obviously, you want to be prepared with your language test and your educational credential assessment for express entry, and you want to have be prepared for new programs to be announced. But I don't think we're going to see like what we saw last year. And again, go on our website, read Mark's blog, read the strategy, more information. But again, my view is that we're not going to see like a big program opening. And again, I could be wrong. And let's hope that I'm wrong in a way, right? Let's hope that we see another program like TR to PR with tons of new temporary residents becoming permanent residents, right? But honestly, it was an exceptional program, and I don't think we're going to see it. We're going to see it again. All right, plowing through questions here again. Just as a brief reminder, my name is Cédric Marin. Head over to our website, Health Immigration Law. We have an express entry course going on right now. That's going to be going on in spousal sponsorship as well. So subscribe to our newsletter, go on to our courses. Everything is in the link in the description, and subscribe. Sometimes we do live Q&As impromptu on weekends, on weekdays, in the evenings. So take a look. And again, I'm just going to loop back for those just joining us. we have a newsletter. And on my last newsletter, I just announced, not announced, but on my last newsletter, I talked about I asked the lawyers in my firm, when is the CRS score going to drop under 500? And in this newsletter coming out this week, I asked my colleagues, I said, what are the most common mistakes in express entry applications? So subscribe to our newsletter if you want to learn more about the most common mistakes in express entry applications. And again, you can head over to our website, subscribe to the newsletter. If you want to speak with me, head over to Speak to a Lawyer. And we have here my colleagues, and I'm here at the bottom. Again, I telework, which means that I'm available in the morning if you're inside Canada. And if you're outside Canada, I'm available during the day, which makes it so lots of availability for clients all around the world. So there we go. Let's head back to the questions. Shivam, I don't think there's going to be another PR to TR coming out. Again, I hope that I'm wrong. I hope it comes out, but honestly, I don't think we're going to see it. All right. Let's keep going. On what basis is certificate d'acceptation Quebec is granted for temporary foreign workers in Quebec, especially if the employee has an LMIE job offer? So FL 350, unfortunately, we are not licensed and we do not practice inside Quebec. So all the legal information we talk about today applies for individuals who want to immigrate to Canada outside of Quebec. So unfortunately, I can't answer your question. Shatan says, thanks a lot, Cédric. My pleasure. Devon says, thank you, sir. Listen, you guys are most welcome. Shatan again says, Shatan Parmar says, thank you, Cédric. Listen, guys, most welcome. Shivam, thank you for the info, Cédric. Just so many thank yous coming in. Listen, guys, my pleasure. We used to do an hour, but you know what? I'm feeling it. Let's continue. Let's try to get to all these questions here, and let's see how far we can get. All right. Express entry profile. Could you explain name change option? So my wife's name was old when she had old passport. After renewing it, when she had to renew EE profile, we changed the name with current passport. Yeah, so there's going to be a question where they're going to ask you about previous names. And so I imagine that that in your case, we're dealing with marriage. She had a name before marriage, a name after marriage. So this could be explained in a letter of explanation. Again, read the question carefully, but you're going to want to declare that she previously used another name, namely, funny enough, her last name. Hanor says, please, Cédric, answer my question. You skipped the order. So nice of you. Hanor, let's take a look. I don't think. Oh, Hanor. All right, I did skip your question. Again, I don't take them in order. Try to take the most helpful ones for everyone, but let's take a look here. Says, all right, I was PR before, did not fulfill residency obligation, got PR expired, appealed for permanent residence travel document on humanitarian and compassionate grounds, refused by visa officer. Will this affect my EE profile decision? So, Hanor, we don't see this every time. If you've been following our live Q&As, this is probably it might be one of the first times someone's in this situation who already made the PRTD application on H&C grounds. And it's really going to come down to the reasons for the refusal, right? Are you refused just because your residency obligation, or are you refused because something more serious like criminality or fraud in previous immigration applications, right? So it's really case by case basis. If you were just, for example, you left at 5 years old because when you were PR, because your parents left, right? Or for whatever reason you lapsed on your residency obligation and you just never got it back. Generally speaking, again, we're just providing general information. There's no problem for applying for permanent residency again if you explain the circumstances that led to the residency obligation, you not respecting it, and what happened, right? And again, if you're like a young child, your parents left, didn't want to come back, it's obviously going to be a little bit outside of your control, right? But again, we typically, without knowing more about your situation, it's hard to say, but generally speaking, right, if you just lapse the residency obligation, there's no problem to make a new application and try from there. All right, and that says, actually, my work experience was in Madagascar. Our bank system isn't developed much, and I don't have offer letter as was family business. Work experience, can my father provide salary certificate? Yeah, and that you can definitely try, right? I mean, generally speaking, again, there's risk when you don't meet the ministerial instructions, and you can prepare your best application with affidavits, supporting documents, contracts, right? Efforts, right? What have you done to try to prove this? You can explain a letter of explanation. I tried to contact the bank. I don't have any pay stubs because it was paid cash. As such, I have an affidavit from my father who you can contact if you want more information, right? So again, if you can avoid it, right? If you have other work experience, I would definitely use that if it's better documented. But generally speaking, just try to do your best to prove the requirements and know that there's some risk in submitting the application. All right, Sri Krishna says, degree certification doc upload section. May I know what other documents to upload along with my degree certificate, WELS and IELTS, or should I include the mark sheets too? So I think by mark sheet, I think you mean transcript, right? And this information is going to be found. I talked about this a lot, but in the completeness check. So the completeness check, take a look at what they want for proof of education. I might have scrolled by it. Nope, I didn't. So why is this up here? There we go. Proof of studies. So here they're going to talk, right? So degree. So it depends, right? This is going to depend whether or not your Canadian experience, right? So in Canadian experience, they just want your certificate and the transcripts, if available, right? So it depends. So, and if you're in Canada, you have to provide the Designated Learning Institute number. And if you're abroad, it's going to talk more about the ECA. So take a very close look at this, review this carefully. In your case, right, you're going to have the degree, you're going to have your education, World Education Services. Again, the World Education Service at the very top, it needs to say that it was done for IRCC. Right? So make sure you obtain the correct one. The IELTS, right? Make sure that you took the proper test as well. And then when it comes to proving this, you can also attach your transcripts, mark sheets, transcripts. If you have your transcripts, fantastic. Upload them, provide them, and yeah, the proof of the foreign points being claimed. So there we go. All right, we take our last final questions here, guys. We're going to wrap things up. Look at the next questions. Shintan says, sorry, your voice isn't audible enough. Apologies for this. Everything seems to be working on my end, but I'll make sure to speak a little bit slower to make sure that everything is being picked up. Listen, guys, a lot of more specific questions dealing with work permits, with study, with experience and whatnot. Listen, I think we're going to end up today's live Q&A with a question from Gis Mary Sam. Says, for creating Express Entry profile, do we need to score in all modules for IELTS at least 6 or 6.5? So excellent question, and this is going to depend on if you're the Canadian Experience class or if you're in the Federal Skilled Workers, right? So let's take a look. So Federal Skilled Worker Program. So this one is if you're outside Canada. Let's go take a look. Oh, nice. We have the survey option. I'm going to click no. Let's take a look here what they want for language ability, right? So get a minimum score of the CLB in 7 in all 4 abilities, right? So here, if you have a 6 and a 6.5, you don't meet the minimum eligibility for Federal Skilled Workers, right? So you're not going to be able to apply, increase your language score, and then you can consider reapplying, right? The Canadian Experience class, let's go take a look here. So here, language ability. So here, it's going to depend on your NOC, right? So if you're currently working in a NOC B job, right? If your primary, this is to do with the primary NOC. If your primary NOC is a NOC B, well, here they're going to accept a CLB level 5, right? So, or if you're working in NOC O or A, they want you to have at least a 7. So if you're under the Canadian Experience class, it could work if your primary occupation, your primary NOC is going to be a NOC B job. So there we have it, guys. Thank you for joining me again. My name is Cédric Marin. I'm at Whole of Immigration Law. Get over to our website. There's also a link in the description below. Go ahead here with Speak to a Lawyer. At the very bottom, or in the middle, I should say, you'll find me, including all the different areas that I touch upon, including express entry, work permits, study permits, and also litigation, right? So if you've been rejected a you've been rejected a visa, been found to have committed a misrepresentation. I wrote these blogs, I wrote these web pages specifically for individuals to explain the process about how does it work to do a judicial review, how does it work to do a mandamus application, right? If your application has been pending for like judicial reviews, if your application has been pending for a considerable amount of time, right, how can you get it back on track and get it expedited, right? So these are stuff that I deal with: work permits, study permits, express entry, and obviously the litigation side. So please feel free to reach out. I'd love to speak with you. And again, if you head over to Canadian Immigration Institute, we do have our courses that are coming up, link inside the descriptions. We also have subscribe to our newsletter. Again, the question for this week is going to be, what are the most common mistakes for express entry? And this is going to be tackled by all our lawyers. They're all going to provide in a few lines what are the most common mistakes. So subscribe if you want to stay informed. Again, guys, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to be back this week. I'm going to do a podcast, a live Q&A with Alicia. Look on our YouTube page for when you're going to see the scheduling coming up. And then I'm also going to do my live Q&A on Thursdays, French and English, Thursdays, 6 a.m. Toronto time. Mark's away this week, but he might jump on for a little live Q&A. So make sure to subscribe, and we hope to speak to you soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.